friends, welcome back to The Corner. My name is Yume. Today we're going to talk about leadership, because this is something that shocked me when I went on my story and I gave a pretty hot take on leadership. I basically said, quote, "Hot take, maybe. There's no such thing as a bad leader because it's contradictory. If you're a true leader, people will follow you because they want to, not because they have to. Leadership has nothing to do with a title. It has to do with your life and how you live it. You don't need to be on top to be a leader. For example, if you're at the top but you lead people into foolishness, you're not a leader, you're just an influencer, and a bad one at that." End quote. And a lot of people disagreed, majority of people disagreed with this in my social circle, which I find interesting. Like, I said it's a hot take, and I put in quote, and I put in the bubble. I can't even come up. I put in I put like maybe, because I literally thought people would agree with me, but I guess not a lot of people do, which is fine. But this made me think, because it's like, I asked, like, okay, give me an example of a bad leader, because I don't believe they don't exist. So give me an example of a bad leader. And people said, the current resident of the United States, Brandon, will say. I don't know if Spotify will. I don't know the parameters of being canceled on Spotify. But Resident Brandon of the United States. And I do not consider him a leader. He is not a leader. I do not follow him. I do not want to live a life that he is an example of. I do not look at him and be like, oh, I want to live like him. He's such a good example. He lives with integrity. He lives with honesty. I want to be like that. I want to be like that. I do not look at him and think that. Therefore, he's not a leader. And even the statistics in the United States, if you look at if the percentage of his approval rate is declining, both by Democrats and Republicans. So it's like, is that showcasing this graph that shows that his numbers of approval are going down, both by Democrats and Republicans? Is this showcasing that he is becoming more of a person that people want to voluntarily follow? Or is it demonstrating the latter? And it's demonstrating the latter. People do not approve of him. They're not following him. Therefore, if he is a leader, which he's not, that's pretty ineffective. He's ineffective. So, okay, a leader is effective. Like, a true leader leads by example, and they don't even call themselves a leader at times. Honestly, a title does not make a leader. People in government, just because they are there, they are not leaders. Look at, actually, I don't want to point at people. Actually, I will. Look at Ron DeSantis. Look at how he cares for his people in his state. Look at how he is unafraid to call people out, to convict people. How he's unafraid to give people a choice. Look at how he gives people a choice. He leaves it in the hands of the people because he trusts the people. And I look at him and I'm like, yeah, like, I want to live, like, that's pretty good. Like, I want to be that kind of person. I want to be unafraid to convict people. I want to be unafraid to speak in conviction and love over people. I want to be able to allow people to be free and to not be micromanaging people because of power and money. He's a leader. And then you look at Okay, I'm from Hawaii. Look at David Ige. Look at Josh Green. Look at Kai Kahele. They're not leaders. I do not consider them leaders. They are simply just managers. Honestly, they're managers. When people say like quote unquote, sorry, this is a side note. When people say quote unquote world leaders, they're not leaders. That's just their title. But that leader word in there means nothing. It means nothing. Anyway, back to our, very questionable governors here. They're cowards. They're cowards. I'm gonna just be real. I'm from Hawaii. I can say this. They're cowards. They only care about money. They're unafraid. What's his name? Josh Green? He constantly just wears his scrubs out in public. And he speaks a big game of, actually caring for people. I'm sure he does to an extent, but he will always, well, not always, I want to have some hope. Because of his current standing in government, at the moment, there is this power that he is tainted by. It's money. It's being paid by Pfizer. It's being paid by all these different, you don't know what's happening behind the scenes. And when people actually approach him and want to talk to him and have a discussion about it, he just walks away. And that to me is not a leader. That's not a leader. You talk a whole big game about loving your people, but then when they want to actually criticize you and want to have conversations about the shady stuff you've been doing, you run away. That's not a leader to me. That's cowardice. And just because he's up there, and I don't hate him, I just strongly abhor and disagree with how he's handling things. So it's like, well, I did kind of, there was, we're all imperfect, right? There was a time where I could firmly say that I hated these people, but the Lord convicted my heart and was like, these people just need prayer, honestly. These people need prayer. Everyone needs prayer. But anyway, so a title does not make a leader. And even if you look at, okay, here's another example, and this is going to hurt a lot of egos, but I'm here for it. Pastors. Right? You look at a pastor and you're like, yes, that's a leader. But are they? Think about that. Like, okay, just because they have that title, it doesn't automatically make them a leader. Like, yes, they are up there in the church. But what makes a leader is you want to follow them and be like them. So just because you're a pastor doesn't mean that you're a leader. And I'll give an example. There was a pastor in what was the let me think. I'm sorry, I'm like looking for the article. Okay, here we go. Pastor of, oh, just kidding. Wrong one. Okay, here we go. American pastor who adopted Haitian orphans charged with child sex abuse. He was a pastor though, right? But he was a pastor. Why did he adopt Haitian orphans and get charged with child sex abuse? I don't want to, just because he's a pastor, like, oh, okay, that's okay, I gotta follow him. No, you don't. I rebuke this man, this monster who molested children and who has a photograph with alleged child trafficker or former president back in the 90s. I don't want to name any names on this podcast, but let's go with I don't even it BILLCLINTON. There you go. I don't know. Sorry guys, I don't know the parameters of like how I'm going to be censored and if I'm going to be censored or not, but I really want to speak this because I care about you and I don't want you to be afraid of stepping out and thinking about these things. But yeah, just because you hold a high seat in a government, in an organization, at work, if you're a manager, it doesn't automatically make you a leader. And people need to realize this. That's why I think, and people aren't taught this. It wasn't even taught in my leadership class at school. I took a leadership class for like the past semester in last spring, and I took this leadership class, and then my professor, at one point he had a PowerPoint, and then he was like, okay, we're gonna get into groups, and then I'm gonna put up like 9 people on the PowerPoint, and you're gonna decide who's the best leader out of all of them and why. And he put up, they were all Democrat politicians, except Trump and Elon Musk. It was like AOC, Greta Thunberg, Bill Gates, and then President Trump, Elon Musk. And I knew if I spoke about picking Trump, I'd be flamed. But honestly, he's the only one up there, and maybe Elon Musk too. He's interesting. They were the only two that and then there was like Nancy Pelosi. Oh my gosh, I can't believe there was Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. It was messy. And then there was Obama too. I don't know if Joe Biden was up there, probably not, but these people were plastered up there. And I was like, ew. Truthfully, like, you think just because they're like a government official / proclaimed leader by media and all that, you think I care? I don't. I'm not gonna follow them. I will never, ever follow them. So it was really confusing to me. And looking back now, that spoke to me. And I wonder, it makes sense now why I was so confused. It was because I strongly knew inside that that's not what makes a leader. Cowardice does not make a leader. Of course it doesn't. A title doesn't make you a leader. Where you stand in society does not make you a leader. How many followers on Instagram or YouTube, it does not make you a leader. So be careful out there, because what a true leader is someone who lives with integrity and by example, and somebody that actually cares about people. Someone who sacrifices for people, someone who will go out of their way to serve others and to stand for truth, to stand their ground. Okay, so let me give an example. And it's like not only serving others, but it's also like just standing up. Because the example I'm about to give is, I think I mentioned this a couple, back in my, I'm gonna mention this in my walk away, episode or whatever. But when I was in high school, I was a liberal. I was in high school, and then I was in my senior year, and I was in my English class, and it was kind of like before class, so people were like talking, and there was this classmate who was being questioned by a handful of other classmates who were like liberal, and they were asking him like, oh, so do you agree with Trump on what he's doing with like immigration? And this singled out student was like, well, he just thinks that people need to come in through the legal process, and there's nothing wrong with that. And then they were like, oh, so do you agree, do you hate gay people? And then, well, actually before that, they were like, oh, so do you consider yourself a Trump supporter? And then this student was like, well, I want him to do well in office, so and I agree with things that he says, so yes, by definition, I am a Trump supporter. And then the kids were like, oh, so, do you hate gay people? They were like asking like a line of questions, trying to put him in a corner basically. And then when they asked him the gay question, he said, well, in my faith, it's a sin to be homosexual. So, I don't, he said like, oh, in my faith, it's a sin to be homosexual. So, and then he said something like, I forget what he said, if he said he hated it or not. I don't recall that he did, but he said something so firm and so confident that it didn't push them away. And then me, I was a liberal in high school, and in that moment, I was like, wow, like, Hannah, you're literally a Christian. Why aren't you standing up like that? I was like, Hime, you're literally a Christian. Why aren't you having that kind of firmness in your own faith, in the own words of God? Why aren't you having that kind of faith? Because in high school, I considered myself, bisexual. I considered myself asexually bisexual, I would call it. And in that moment, I felt so convicted, and he wasn't even talking to me. That classmate wasn't even talking to me, and it convicted me. In that moment, I realized what a leader truly is. It's like, in that moment, he didn't even know that. He probably didn't even think about who was listening besides the people, the kids in front of him. He just stood his ground and led by example. And I bet he didn't even realize it. And I'm so glad, I'm so grateful that I was able to tell him that like a few years later. I was able to be like, hey, remember? Well, in high school you did this, and it really like made me concerned. Like, it was, it really opened my eyes. So I'm so glad the Lord was able to kind of give me that moment. And another example of a good leader would be, I'm kind of like, if you ever saw the movie Hacksaw Ridge, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's this guy who was in World War II named Desmond Doss, who was a conscientious objector, who was a Seventh-day Adventist, and in his faith, he really obeyed the 10 Commandments, especially do not murder. And when he went into the military, he wanted to be a medic, an army medic on the battlefield, and he didn't want to use a gun. And his whole entire platoon hated him. They shunned him. They abused him. They beat him. They threw their boots at him while he was praying at night. On the battlefield, it was hard because it's like, oh, he doesn't have a gun. He's not going to protect me. How do I expect you to protect me if you don't have a gun? But, Desmond Doss, he really sacrificed himself for his team. He was on the battlefield for long nights, and he would drag out hundreds of his teammates, his brothers, I guess you could say. I don't know, I'm not in the military. I don't know if I should say that. But, I see people, and they're kind of like that. Anyway, but he really dragged everyone, or like as much people as he could. And he saved a lot of lives. And these were the same men that abused him, that laughed at him, that did not trust him. These were the same men that threw their boots at him while he'd pray. Like, I don't know if I could say hated him, but they didn't trust him to save their life like that. I look at him, and he was not the commander or whatever of his team. He was just one of them, and he wasn't, not the commander, but the sergeant or whatever. He wasn't of any, high title, but his heart was so pure and on fire to save his friends. And I bet, like, and watching, like, interviews and stuff, like, you can tell that he genuinely cared for people. You can tell he loved people. That he's so humble in his ways that he's, like, you know, that's just what he does. Sorry, there's a car passing by. But that to me is a true leader. That is true leader behavior. Is Brandon, for example, going back to bad leaders, quote unquote bad leaders, is Brandon making me feel that way? Does Hitler make you feel that way? People who are liberal, who hated Trump for 4 years, even if he was a bad leader, which he isn't, the media just lied to us. It's like, I look at Desmond Doss and, like, my classmate, and I'm like, yeah, that is how I ought to live. I look at Jesus Christ and I'm like, yes, that is how I ought to live. Because they're leaders. And quote unquote bad leaders like Resident Brandon, a horrible manager, at my old jobs that didn't listen or anything like that, or weren't organized. I don't look at them and I'm like, yeah, I want to be like that. I want to be like that. I want to follow that example. I don't look at them like that because they're not leaders. I don't consider them leaders. They just have a title. They're just my manager. So I hope this kind of like opens, your mind a little bit. And we need to regain, the word leader needs to be regained, I guess, is kind of what I want to leave off on, because a lot of people misunderstand it now. They think it's like, a high person in a high place. It's not. It's somebody who is willing to like go against the grain and change things. Somebody who like genuinely cares about people. Someone who isn't afraid to be hated, because they will be hated. Leaders can be hated. They are hated. If you're a leader, people will hate you. People will follow you, but people will also hate you because you're doing something that makes them uncomfortable. You're doing something that convicts, and it makes them uncomfortable because it convicts them, because they don't want to hear it, because you're stepping into their life and convicting them in love, rebuking whatever wrongdoing they have in their life, and they don't like that. And it's like, a leader is willing to stand their ground in that kind of situation. And a leader is also willing to know when to dust off their feet and move on. It's not somebody who's controlling. A leader is not controlling. That's a dictator. A leader truly cares about you. So if you look at government officials who don't care about you, they're not leaders. Your old manager who was horrible at scheduling you and never communicated with you, they're not a leader. And even I'm being convicted, honestly. Like there are so many things that I need to change about myself. Like I need to be more communicative. I need to be more concerned about people. I need to be more afraid to not be hated for doing the right thing. I need to be more intentional and, I just need to be more intentional with people, and I need to actually care about the things that people care about. So yeah, I hope this helped a little bit. I hope this gives you some food for thought, and let me know in the comments on my YouTube video or something. This is probably going up on Spotify, but let me know in the comments if anything I said has offended you. If this has offended you, go ahead and give it a 1 star or a 2 star if you kind of like thought of something, if you liked something. If you agree, give it a 5 star. Drop a like or a dislike. I'm sad I won't be able to see it, but that's another, okay, never mind. Okay, finally, okay, I'll leave out on this note. That's another thing. Well, maybe I won't. Okay, I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, I pray that people will be unafraid to be convicted, and people will be more willing to live a life that goes against the grain, because that to me is a true leader. That to me is a leader, period. That's true leader as in, like, that's the actual definition of a leader. Okay, I think that's all. I hope you have a good day. Thank you for coming back to the corner. There's cookies and coffee on your way out. All right, God bless.